Well, here's something you don't quite see every day. A gingerbread man going for a health examination and finding that his blood sugar is way too high. But what would you expect anyway? I mean, he's a gingerbread man, he's made out of sugar. But if you're not a gingerbread man and you went for a health examination and it found that your blood sugar was a bit too high, then you may be diagnosed with diabetes. Well, welcome back to our video series on the topic of hormones. In this video, we'll be talking a bit more about diabetes. And diabetes is a disease of the endocrine system. We remember that hormones are involved in coordinating the activities of the body, including regulating the blood sugar level. And when that goes wrong, then a person may get diabetes. So in the rest of this video, we'll be looking at two hormones, insulin and glucagon, and what are the effects on the body. Some of this will already be familiar to you from our previous topics. And we'll also be looking into two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and what the difference is. For your textbook reference, here it is. So let's start with the hormone insulin. What is the effect that insulin has on our body? Well, to put it simply, insulin helps to decrease the level of glucose in your blood, or the blood glucose level. And it does this in a few ways. Firstly, insulin increases the uptake of glucose by cells. So glucose moves from the blood into the cells, right? So that decreases the level of glucose in the blood. And insulin also encourages cells to oxidize glucose and to use up glucose through aerobic respiration. So it causes cells to take up the glucose and to use it to produce energy through aerobic respiration. Oxidation of glucose basically means combining glucose with oxygen, which is aerobic respiration. And finally, insulin also helps to increase the conversion of glucose to glycogen, which takes place inside the cells. Alright, so insulin is a bit like a key, if you can see this diagram here. Without insulin, glucose kind of remains in the blood, but when insulin acts on cells, it increases the permeability of the cells to glucose. It unlocks the cells in a sense, and glucose is able to move into your cells, thus decreasing the level of glucose in your blood. So what happens if insulin levels are too high or too low? I want you to take a moment to think about it, pause the video, and when you're done thinking about this question, you can continue on. Well, I hope that you managed to form some thoughts of your own, and you realize that if the effect of insulin is to decrease the blood glucose levels, then if insulin levels are too high, then blood glucose levels may become too low. And this may actually lead to shock because a person has not enough glucose in the blood and may result in death or even coma. On the other hand, if insulin levels are too low, then blood glucose levels might become too high. So much so that glucose becomes even lost in the urine because your kidney is not able to reabsorb all the glucose. And this is a symptom of diabetes. And furthermore, if the blood glucose levels become too high, then it might also lead to a sense of weakness and even weight loss. Because without insulin, or when there's too little insulin, cells do not take up glucose, cells do not store it as glycogen. So our cells are basically starving, and that's why you get a feeling of weakness and also lose weight. Alright, so that's insulin. How about glucagon? Now, glucagon is a hormone which acts to increase the level of glucose in your blood. And it does this mainly by acting on the liver. So glucagon, which is produced by the pancreas, will act on the liver and cause the liver to convert glycogen back to glucose and release the glucose into the blood. And secondly, the liver also has the ability to convert fats, you can see glycerol here from fats, and amino acids into glucose. So the liver can actually synthesize glucose from amino acids and fats and release that glucose into your blood, which increases the amount of glucose in your bloodstream. Alright, time for you to do a bit of discovery on your own. So I would like you to read your textbook on these pages and answer these questions. There's these thing called ketones. What are they and when does the body produce them? And also what are the main target organs of insulin and glucagon? Alright, have a read and enjoy it, and continue the video once you're ready. Alright, now that we've seen the roles of insulin and glucagon in regulating the level of blood glucose, we're going to turn our attention to diabetes. Now, in the recent National Day rally speech, diabetes was actually mentioned by our Prime Minister, and I would like you to listen to what he has to say about diabetes.
One big reason for ill health in old age is diabetes. Almost a third of those over the age of 60 have diabetes. At first, diabetes is an invisible disease, but over time, its consequences are severe. Blindness, heart disease, kidney failure, amputated limbs. This is why we must go all out.
So diabetes is an increasing concern in Singapore society, and that's why we're learning about it. It's not just, don't think of it as just in your textbooks. One day you guys will be the scientists, the healthcare people, the engineers who will come up with solutions to go all out to fight diabetes. So how are we to fight diabetes if it's such a great problem? And we do see it increasing. If you've ever been to MRT stations and you see some people who have amputated limbs and lost their limbs, a lot of these are people with diabetes. So it is a real problem in our society, and I hope that as we learn about it, you will also think about how we can help fight diabetes together as a country. So what is diabetes? The full name of diabetes is diabetes mellitus. Right, it's a disease where blood glucose levels exceed normal limits. What are the normal limits? Well, if you test yourself for diabetes, usually the doctor will ask you to fast beforehand. That means to not eat anything for a number of hours. And if you haven't eaten for a number of hours, then your normal blood glucose level would be about 99 milligrams per deciliter. And if you have a result of above 126, then you'll be considered as having diabetes. Now, between 100 and 125, that will be pre-diabetes, which is that you are at risk of developing diabetes. Now, in diabetes, the kidney is also unable to reabsorb all the glucose in the kidney tubules, right? It's not able to reabsorb everything, and so some glucose is excreted in the urine as well.
Everyone, please welcome Chelsea to the show. Chelsea, thanks for joining us. When did you diagnose with diabetes?
When I was 9 in 1994.
And I want to remind everyone that there is a difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, which is what Chelsea has, occurs when your body stops making insulin. Say you're eating an apple. Well, what's an apple? Carbohydrates, sugars. When you eat that apple, your body begins to break down those carbohydrates so that it can absorb that sugar in your bloodstream. Meanwhile, your pancreas secretes insulin. And the insulin will then attach to the sugar in the bloodstream, also known as the glucose, which you're going to see here. And what that does is the insulin shepherds that glucose into your body cells, into your brain cells, into your muscles, so you can think, so you can run, so your heart can beat. And I want everyone to look at this demo. Pretend this is your blood vessel. And in there, those are blood glucose molecules, okay? In someone with type 1 diabetes, there is no insulin to go in there and grab that glucose and pull it into your cells. A normal person, the insulin will come in, attach itself, and pull it into your cells, just like that. In someone with type 2 diabetes, you'll still make insulin, but your body is less responsive to it. So the insulin may be coursing through your blood, but your body cells they're not as responsive to it. So even though you have insulin, you still end up with a lot of glucose in your bloodstream.
Alright, so I hope that video was helpful. I just need to point out one inaccurate piece of information from the video. The man mentioned that insulin binds to glucose. and shepherds it into the cells. This is probably not accurate in the sense that insulin doesn't bind to glucose. Right? Remember, insulin binds to receptors on the cells, and that causes the cells to become more permeable to glucose. Alright, so this is just one inaccurate thing that I need to point out. So also reminds you not to believe everything that you watch, but check it against the textbooks as well. What is type 1 diabetes? Well, if you're listening to the video carefully, you have realized that the girl in the video has type 1 diabetes, and she had it since she was 9 years old. So type 1 diabetes is a kind of juvenile or early onset diabetes. And a lot of times the person finds out in childhood or when they're young. And type 1 diabetes is when the islets of Langerhans are not able to secrete enough insulin into the blood. So not enough insulin means that glucose remains in the blood, and that's why the blood glucose becomes high. And the reason why the islets of Langerhans are not able to secrete enough insulin is because type 1 diabetes is actually a disease of the immune system. So it is when the body's immune cells destroy the beta cells in the islets of Langerhans. They recognize them as foreign and destroy them. So that's the kind of the immune system messing up in type 1 diabetes. Now, on the other hand, type 2 diabetes is late onset diabetes. In other words, it happens usually later in adulthood. And the problem here is not that the body cannot produce insulin. The body can still produce insulin, but the target cells, for example the muscles or the cells in the liver, do not respond well to insulin anymore. So here's the pancreas, it still produces insulin, but the cells fail to respond to insulin properly, and so they do not become more permeable to glucose, and glucose remains in the bloodstream and glucose levels remain high. So just a bit of extra to share with you all is that people don't normally get type 2 diabetes immediately. They usually go through a stage called pre-diabetes, where their cells become less sensitive to insulin. So the cells are said to develop insulin resistance. And that's often because of their diet, so they eat a lot of more unhealthy or fatty substances or sugary substances. Now in this case, what happens, if the cells are less sensitive to insulin, then the pancreas will try to produce more insulin, right? Try to stimulate the cells. And for a while, that's okay, right? More insulin in the blood helps to keep things in check. But there's a limit to how hard the pancreas can work. And so eventually the person still ends up, even though the pancreas is producing lots and lots of insulin, the cells are not responding. And so that's how diabetes occurs, right? So we go from pre-diabetes into having diabetes. So what are the symptoms of diabetes? Well, you need to know some of this. So in particular, why is it that diabetes people are tired or always experience hunger? That's because the cells are not taking up the glucose, alright, from the blood. And why is it that people with diabetes tend to be very thirsty or have to go frequently urinate? And that's probably because the body is trying to flush out the excess glucose in their blood through passing out the glucose in the urine. Alright, so just get familiar with some of these symptoms. Also think about why is it that they suddenly lose a lot of weight. Alright, I'm going to pause here, and in part 2 of this part on diabetes, we're going to talk just a bit about how diabetes can be managed. Alright, see you there.